April 29th, 2020. Some COVID-19 thoughts. Some things that they don't tell you. We have a fancy counter on every news station that tells us the update of the amount of people tested, amount of people sick, amount of people have died. We got heat maps, we got dashboards at county websites. We've got all the fancy tools that are flashing the numbers at all times. And it puts it in our head what a problem it is that we're facing with this COVID-19. And again, I'm not going to say it's not an issue, not a problem, but everything in life is perspective. And first of all, we have to realize that what they don't tell you is you don't have to test positive for the COVID-19 to be counted as a mortality or a death of COVID-19. If you just Google CDC government guidelines for death certificate of COVID-19, you'll pull up. You do not need to test. So the starting point, the death count, which is what everybody's concerned about. I mean, people aren't so much concerned about getting sick as they are what that can lead to, and that's death. So if this was a virus where we just got sick and didn't feel good for a while, then we got better, and nobody died, nobody would care, and it wouldn't be a concern. Let's look at it factually. What the worry is that we die. So, and what we were told was such a high death rate and a high contagious rate. But what they don't tell you is that ultimate number, the number that we're most concerned about, which is dying. You don't have to count. You do not have to test positive for COVID-19 in order to be labeled a fatality of COVID-19. The guidelines clearly say that the doctor that's overseeing can assume that that's what contributed to your death or caused your death. So, and it clearly says you don't even have to be, doesn't even have to be the reason. It can just say it contributed, and the guidelines say if the doctor assumes that COVID-19 contributed to your death or caused your death, then it can be labeled on the death certificate and no test is needed. And again, you go to just Google, and I'll add the link later to this video in the description. It is the 29th, and it is about 10:30 in the morning or so. So later today I can add it, but it's cdc.gov, guidelines for death certificate COVID-19, and you can find it yourself. But, so that's the starting point. So we have these fancy dashboards, we have these fancy counters, we have all this, it's constantly put in our face, and people, rightly so, they see it all the time, therefore it is a concern and they're scared. And some people should be. I mean, but it's not. But it needs to be put in perspective. Imagine if we had a heat lamp or a heat dashboard or heat map dashboard on every channel, everywhere you saw, save for the flu. Well, if you had that, and per CDC guideline, or CDC stats, 2017-2018 flu season, if we had a counter every day, we would have added 406 people dead per day for 5 months. Flu season goes from October 1 to March 31st, and 61,000 people died. 61,000, that's 12,000 a month. So more people died in that flu season that have died from COVID-19 already. And now keep in mind, people say, well, that's the flu, and we know what's going on with that. And that's kind of the point. Is, we have a vaccine for the flu. Roughly a third, a little bit over a third of the country took the vaccine for the flu, and 61,000 people still died. 12,000 a month for 5 months. And then if you look at the hospitalizations they're astronomical, what we took in. If you look at the number of people they estimated got the flu, during that flu season, CDC estimates 43 million got the flu. 43 million. 43 million. We have 1.1 million as of today in that ballpark who have got COVID-19. We've got roughly 58 to 60,000 that have died. Well, that flu season, which we had a vaccine for, we had about 43 million estimated to get the flu that year, and we had 61,000 deaths. Imagine if we had a heat map, we had hot spots, we had counters on every channel during the flu season. It would change our perspective on flu season completely. So, with all these fancy heat maps and marketing techniques that we're using, for the COVID-19, we have to keep that in mind, put it in perspective. If we kept a counter, what if we kept a counter on people who died every day from diabetes, which is about 83,000 people. 83,000 people die a year from diabetes. Well, that's 228 people a day. 228 people a day. Imagine if we had a counter for that. Imagine if we had a counter for Alzheimer's. You have 121,400 people die per day per year from Alzheimer's. That comes out to 332 people a day die from Alzheimer's. Imagine if we had a heat map for that on every channel. And if that's all you saw, if you didn't have the COVID-19, you didn't have any, if the only heat map you had was Alzheimer's, and all they did was talk about 332 people die per day from Alzheimer's, that would be front and center. And we would act very differently. And we would think very differently. What about lower respiratory infections, chest infections? You've got 438 people die per day from that. 438 per day. That's 160,200 per year die from that. Imagine if you had a heat map for that put up next to COVID-19, or just by itself. Let's say you just talked about it by yourself. What would we think of that? Let's go to the big ones. How about heart disease? Heart disease. How would you think differently about going to McDonald's or going to Burger King or going to Wendy's or eating anything that was fatty if you knew 1,772 people die per day, or 647,000 per year die from heart disease? It would probably change your eating habits. If all you saw on every channel was a heat map of where people are dying, a counter, how many people are dying, how many people have been diagnosed that day with heart disease, you would think of it very, very differently. So we're all worried about COVID-19, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be concerned about it. I'm not saying it's not an issue, but when you put it in perspective of threats to the life, I mean, ultimately what it's about dying. And nobody wants to die premature. We know we all die one day, but we don't want to die prematurely. So that's what the worry is. But something else that's not told us, back just on the COVID-19, is that death count isn't right. I know I already touched on that, but that death count of 58,000 roughly we're at right now as of the 29th of April, it's not an accurate death count, and they're not telling you that you don't have to test positive. So how many people are in that group that didn't test positive that are strictly off of what the doctor assumed? We don't know. We don't know if the real death count is, and you kind of have to wonder why it is that they're doing that. Why would you want to inflate that number? Why do you want to make the assumption? But they are. So that number is not even right. But when you look at that death count of COVID-19, which we know is not right, then you compare it to other deadly diseases, it's not really one of the top. And it's not probably the one that's going to get you. It doesn't mean you don't have to care about it. But something else they don't tell you is that about 85-90% of the people that have died from COVID-19, they had 3 or more pre-existing conditions before they died. So they had 3 or more pre-existing conditions before they caught the COVID-19. So that means, somebody has diabetes, they have at least 3 other, on average, pre-existing conditions before they succumb to supposedly COVID-19. Then how do you really know what it is that killed them? It's like the straw that broke the camel's back. But something else they don't really talk too much about is if you are 50 and under, no pre-existing conditions, the chances of, I can just tell you that less than 1% of the deaths worldwide are from people that are 50 or under with no pre-existing conditions. Less than 1%. It is like 0.9% that make up all the 0.9% is what makes up all the deaths under 50. And I've heard different reports that half of those people have pre-existing conditions. But you have to realize 0.9% of the deaths. I mean, that comes out to be I did the math before. I think it comes out to be worldwide. Comes out to be around 2,000 people. So 2,000 people worldwide have died under 50, and the majority of them have had pre-existing conditions. But let's say it's even not. Forget the pre-existing conditions. 2,000 people under 50 have died from COVID-19 worldwide. So what is that? And I haven't done the math, but 2,000 people, we have what? We have 7.8 billion people in the world. So what are the chances of somebody under 50 dying from COVID-19? Very, very, very low. And I know the whole nebulous thing that there could be they could be a carrier. But my whole point of this video is putting it in perspective. Put it in perspective. What if we had all the cancer? We have 1,641 people die per day from cancer. Imagine that being up next to COVID-19. Imagine heart disease being up next to COVID-19. Those two, cancer and heart disease, blow away COVID-19 as far as daily deaths and annual deaths. 647,000 people die a year from heart disease. 599,000, and this is in America. This is just America. So 647,000 Americans die per year from heart disease. 599,000 people die per year in America from cancer. So, we're at 58,000 with COVID-19. Now, I know what people will say. It was like, well, with the COVID-19, we don't have a vaccine for that. We don't know, we don't know what's going to, how fast it's going to spread or whatever. We kind of have an idea of how much it's going to spread. And no, we don't have a vaccine for it. We don't have a vaccine for cancer either. We don't have a vaccine for diabetes. We don't have a vaccine for Alzheimer's. And we live with it. So, if we never got a vaccine for COVID-19 and we had to deal with those odds, we had to deal with just that virus running around, well, it would rank low on the list of killers. But we get sold on the heat map, we get sold on the counter, we get sold on the fact that it's all you hear about. You hear about it nonstop. And you have to think about how much of that is put into your head that's not based on the real prevalence of that being a danger to you. And it's not really in perspective. Especially if you're under 50. If you are 50 and under and you have no pre-existing conditions, the chances of you dying are incredibly low. Incredibly low. And I just haven't done the math. But like I said before, there's less than 1% of the deaths worldwide are people under 50. It's like 0.9%. So it's like 2,000 people. And then the majority of them have pre-existing conditions. But when you put in the perspective of all the threats that are out there, it ranks very, very low. But the heat maps, the counters, the fancy stats, the dashboards, all that stuff and all the drama that is created around it, we hear every single day, many times per day, on the radio, on the TV, on YouTube. It's everywhere. It's really being shoved down our throats. And the starting point, and this is the thing that I find the most outrageous about it is our concern is dying. It's not getting sick and then recovering. Nobody wants to get sick, obviously, and nobody wants to have to recover, but nobody would be too concerned if we didn't have the fear of dying from it. But the death count that we have, you don't have to test positive for the virus to go into that death count. So the fear, the ultimate fear of death, that number, we really don't know what it is. We really do not know. And that's the craziest part, because that's really what we're afraid of. If the death count was 0, which obviously it's not, but if the death count was 0, nobody would give a shit. Nobody would care. They'd be like, oh, I really don't want to get sick. I really don't want to go through that. And I don't want to deal with it. But nobody dies from it. I just don't want to go through that misery. But that's just like anything else. Nobody wants to get the cold. Nobody wants to get the flu. Nobody wants to get sick. But we wouldn't be fearful. But that number that we fear is the death count. We don't even know what that number is. And they don't talk about that. And they should. And if they really want to make us aware of potential threats in our lives, then up on that heat count, that heat map, and up on that counter, up on those great graphics that everybody's got, they should list these other deaths and put it in perspective. And when we put it in perspective, it changes the fear completely.